Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the cool new painting style that everybody's talking about, double slap chop. This is a great style, and it will help you improve your miniature painting game immeasurably. Best of all, it's pretty easy to do. Let's get to it. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is proudly supported by these sponsors. When Citadel introduced contrast paints, and the Army Painter, Vallejo, and others followed suit with their own zenithal paints, the hobby of painting miniatures evolved dramatically. All of this in a very short span of time. Suddenly, there was another option besides the traditional layer painting method to get your models done both quickly and well. Moreover, these new paints could be tweaked and combined to make even more powerful options, because they can layer when mixed with a little standard acrylic paint, and can be used as both a glaze and a wash as well. But a new product on its own isn't of much use without a technique that maximizes it, and so the miniature painting world got introduced to all manner of zenithal underpainting methods. This involves laying down shades of white, gray, or even black, usually by a dry brush, that would provide the tonal variation and depth behind these cool new zenithal paints. And what did the world call this powerful new painting technique? Something equally refined as the paints themselves, I hope. Maybe some title evocative of the ease for which beginners could master the craft of miniature painting now, where previously the bar for entry was pretty high. No, they didn't do any of these things. They settled on naming the process after an obscure mail-order kitchen device advertised by an annoying and morally ambiguous infomercial host. They called the innovative painting method that catapulted our hobby ahead by decades slap chop. Fast forward to the present, and the phrase slap chop is being bandied about everywhere in miniature painting circles. It's become so ubiquitous that my son attended a miniature painting clinic last year where the instructor was teaching old-fashioned acrylic layering, but he referred to his method as slap chop, even though no zenithal effects were being used at all. Despite this, though, and the misunderstanding of the terminology, it's certain that the slap chop approach works, and it's a powerful option that we miniature painters now enjoy. But, of course, progress doesn't stand still. Somewhere, someone decided that if they can use zenithal underpainting to make tonal variation on models, then they could also use zenithal overpainting to make it all even better. This process is now referred to as double slap chop. You think we'd learn to improve our naming conventions, but no. Now, to give credit where it's due, I'm pretty sure Don Serratos, who is a fantastic painter, pioneered the double slap chop approach. And, like its predecessor, we have a winner of a technique. I'm sure that we'll be talking about double slap chop for years to come. In this video, I'm going to take you on a fast tour of just what double slap chop is, and how to do it. I'm going to demonstrate on these cool miniatures from the US and Lower Canada sets by North Star, but of course these techniques would work well on any type of model or even your terrain. With all that out of the way, let's get down to business. To start double slap chop, you first use, slap chop. To do this, take your model and prime it dark. Traditionally, this is done with black, but I favor a dark gray. On top of this, you begin airbrushing or dry brushing increasingly lighter shades of gray until you put on a final layer of white. How many layers you use is up to you. The darker you start and the lighter you go will create more depth. I honestly just dry brush one medium gray layer over the dark gray primer and then finish with 2 layers of white. One thing I can say from experience here is Don't be afraid of dry brushing 2 or even more layers of the same color to get a nice sharp gradient. Also remember to go lighter on your brush pressure from each layer to the next. A tip I discovered is to start your darker tones with a medium or even a small dry brush so you can dig into the depths of the model. Now go ahead and do the final layers with a very light pass of a larger dry brush. The larger brush doesn't fit into the nooks and crannies of the model, keeping it dark where it needs to be. Once all of your dry brush layers are dry, go ahead and begin using your zenithal paints to block the model in. I'm using Army Paint or Speedpaint, of course, but Contrast, Color Xpress, or any other zenithal paint would work just fine. As an aside, it's important to remember your painting basics at this stage. Work from the largest color block to the smallest, and remember to start with a dark color. This is because the following layers will all need to be lighter shades of the initial color that you laid down. We'll get into more on this later. How far you go with this step is up to you, but I usually go right down to the finest details. The only exception here is with the skin and the metallics. I just don't find the slap chop type of method works very well on these elements, so I leave these for more traditional techniques. You may, of course, have other preferences. Once the model is finished being blocked in, you'll see the depths of color you usually get with the regular zenithal process, and in some spots, particularly with light colors, you may want to just leave it as is. But for the rest, it's time to add the double in double slap chop. Grabbing a large dry brush and loading it with straight white, I take the model and very lightly dry brush it over the areas I just blocked in. Yes, this is hard to do. Watching all your previous work get covered up by the chalky frosted white is kind of nerve-wracking, but have faith, it'll all be worth it in the end. After you've laid down the new zenithal layer, and I suggest 1 or 2 lightly dry brush layers here, you can go back to your zenithal paints. There are 2 ways to apply your next color over the newly dry brushed areas. First, you can take the same color you used previously and thin it with the appropriate thinner until it's translucent, and then you can just apply that. Or second, you can find a similar but lighter color and apply that instead. Here I've put the very dark Tyrian navy down, and now I'm selecting magic blue to go over top. When they dry, I get a nice gradient. If I had specific advice here, I would say, where possible, always use a second different but similar lighter color as opposed to the thinned down version of the initial color. This way the results just look better, but if your paint selection is limited, you might just have to go with a thinner option. At this point, the double slap chop process is pretty much done, but like a lot of painters, I like to push the contrast a little further, so I mix white or ivory into the lighter color and brush this on as a traditional highlight. This, of course, though, would be up to you, and it isn't always appropriate on all surfaces. I also use a white acrylic marker to clean up the areas of flesh and metallics. I find speed paint metallics and flesh tones just work better over straight white, so I run with this. I also, again, throw in a final highlight if I think it's needed. Remember that I don't start from black like a lot of slap chop painters. This is because I find starting over black just looks too chalky, and also I don't mind post shading. I do this by going back to the original dark color for each block and feather it out from the most recessed areas or shadowed areas to clean up my mistakes and establish depth. This stage is pretty much optional though, and depending on your process, it might not be needed. And now you're almost done. I tend to use a black panel liner at this point to pick out the deep clothing folds and the fine details, so I just go ahead and do this. And then I finish up with basing and a layer of matte varnish. And with this, my double slap chop models are done. Is this the ultimate painting style? Well, no, not really. It has the same drawback of any zenithal scheme. Mainly, it has a faintly chalky finish. However, you could of course fix this by layering or glazing, but I think for the most part anyone can get away with it. What double slap chop does do is it provides an advantage in that it gives you a fast and easy template to work from, removing the ambiguities that plague model painters of all levels, which is mainly where to put the highlights, as the second round of dry brushing decides this for you. So there you have it, my guide to double slap chop. I hope this helps you discover this awesome new painting method. I would encourage you to give it a try for yourself. You might just find double slap chop becoming your go-to painting technique for the years to come. If you'd like to learn more about snow bases for miniatures, please consider watching this video, or watch this other video instead. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and if you can, check out my Patreon. See you next time, and most importantly, remember to keep building life in miniature.